Bitcoin. So, I think this is going to be a little bit of an update on the political spectrum, and the, Trump administration and the shift over from the Biden administration. Biden, of course, quite punitive, I would say, to the Bitcoin industry as a whole. Trump has been, very receptive to conversations, and there's a vibe shift definitely there, but there is a lot more going on in the broader political sense. So we'll get a good point of view from a Bitcoiner that I would venture to say, or at least assume that is not a Trump supporter, and how he's sort of reconciling these things. So I'm excited for this chat. Next week on Monday, we have baseload energy. So this is going to be focused on the energy industry, energy prices, basically how different grid systems within the United States work. That'll be like mining adjacent. On the last one, they didn't really get into Bitcoin mining as much. It was much more energy focused. So that's on Monday night. And then on Thursday night, back to the regular programming, we have Nick Newman, the CEO from Casa, talking about securing your Bitcoin in a way that's much more sophisticated, much more secure. So it's a multi-sig where you have 3 keys or more, multiple devices, and you're able to basically distribute that single point of failure. When you have a Bitcoin wallet, the private key comes out in a seed phrase, and it's exactly like that's the value of the Bitcoin wallet. There's a way to break that up, and there's a way to have a much more sophisticated security mechanism in place to protect your coins. So I am going to go wrangle our 2 guests. I think that they're coming to the back slowly here. All right, there we go. We got Jason. All right, Jason, come on back. I'm already doing the intros. Let's go. Is it Arsh, or are you doing it tonight? Are you sitting here? Oh, I thought it was Arsh. I already introduced Arsh. Huh? Yeah, we're starting. Welcome to the stage. Everybody, a round of applause. Okay, so as always, this is a tavern chat. All right, so if we use a term of art, or if we're discussing something that you want to double click on or you don't quite understand, you can interrupt. Just raise your hand, or you can politely interrupt. Depending on the guests, you can impolitely interrupt. But it's supposed to be a tavern chat. This is an open conversation. Welcome to PubKey. Tip your bartenders. Thank you for being here.
Yeah?
Hello? Testing, testing. That sounds right.
Hi,
Well,
Zach.
Yeah, hi, Jason. Welcome, everybody, to the latest HRF Freedom Tech Series. Big thank you to PubKey for hosting these with us. Tonight, we have a very special guest. His name is Jason Maier. He is a teacher and an author of A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin, one of my favorite Bitcoin books. But who better to give him an introduction than the man himself? Jason, take it away.
Thanks, Zach. So I'm from Connecticut, and when I woke up this morning, I taught first period calculus. That's how I started my day. So fundamental calculus to start, and then train ride. Now I'm here. So section 2 is happy because I got to cancel their class because I didn't need to make the train. But so I'm a high school math teacher. It's been my passion. Like I grew up wanting to be a math teacher, actually. Like people laugh when I say that, but I'm literally living my dream. I get to be a high school math teacher, right? And I fell in love with Bitcoin because I knew enough math to understand it and fall in love with it. So that sort of slowly led into me writing the book, Progressive's Case for Bitcoin, because I realized that I wanted to be able to explain Bitcoin to the people that I cared about, my friends, family, workers, in a way that would resonate with them. And what I was seeing a lot of was language and vocabulary and principles that were really popular in the Bitcoin space that I knew would turn. It would, yeah, I'm being censored already. I haven't even said the spicy stuff yet. So I really wanted to teach Bitcoin to like people I cared about, and I realized that a lot of the stuff that you can see on Twitter, on social media, on the platforms that are really popular was going to be a turnoff for them. So I wrote a book about it. So that's me. Yep.
Very inspiring. And was writing a book also part of your dream when you were younger, alongside being a math teacher, or is that something that kind of came about as you learned about Bitcoin?
Absolutely not. Like,
Okay.
I had no intention of writing a book, no interest in it at all. And so, like, what they say is bad luck. If there's a book you want to read and it doesn't exist, then you should write it. And I was stupid enough to like sit down and start writing a book, right? And I had like literally just a Google Doc, like with bullet points. I was like, I'm just gonna do this, and then realized that, oh, this is a lot of work. So it's one of the many things I've done in my life that if I would have known how much work it takes to do it when I started, I would not have done it. And so I'm happy that I didn't know. I just sort of dove into it. So this is actually like a little bit of life advice where me.
We could pass this mic between us. Or we can just
Does this
switch.
work? Okay. It could. Who knows? Who knows? My obsession with Bitcoin like didn't tear my marriage apart, but my wife was starting to notice like you're starting to work on this book all the time. You need to come up with like a schedule because the kids need to see you, and I need you to like do the dishes and stuff. So the agreement was that I would wake up early. I could either do it after the kids were asleep at night, or I could wake up early and work on the book. And I knew that if I wanted to work on the book at night, I wouldn't have the energy and I wouldn't be able to focus. So I woke up for about a year and a half at 5 in the morning and worked on the book for 2.5 hours every morning. It was a beautiful time to get work done. The kids were still asleep. I didn't have to go to work yet. The sun was rising. Just when it was nice out, I would go out on my porch and just write a book. Life advice, like compartmentalize and work with your life partner to make sure that you're actually contributing when you need to contribute, and not just like at your computer when you're supposed to be parenting. But it worked out, and she was very supportive once we had a plan, and that's how it went.
Beautiful. Yeah, I can attest to that. As a writer myself, working in the morning is like a very special time. By the end of the day, you're just too gassed. And so, no. So, when I was thinking about where to start this conversation, well, actually, it was quite obvious right from the get-go. I knew exactly what I wanted you to talk about first. But before we start there, I want to see how many of you have read Jason's book before? A show of hands. Okay, so
Nice.
a minority. However, that's still pretty solid. If you haven't read his book, definitely give it a read. It's, I think it probably gives the message that Bitcoin is for everyone better than any other Bitcoin book that I have read. So it's something I've gifted many times. But Jason, you start the book with a tangible example of what I would say illustrates sort of the absurdity and brokenness of the current monetary system that we're living in, and how the systems we've built around it are unable to fix that. And to do so, you talk about the minting of a $1 trillion platinum coin. And this is a very serious topic that happened in 2021 in response to a stalemate on raising the debt ceiling between the left and the right. So maybe you could sort of just walk us through what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, the very short version, for those of you who weren't paying attention at the time, was, we have all this debt, and how are we going to solve it? And there's a debt ceiling, and people are politicizing it, and the people on the right are playing football with it, and the people on the right and left are both playing football with this thing. And so the solution was, we're just going to print a $1 trillion platinum coin. It was just a stupid gimmick. It was so fucking dumb. Like, it was
Didn't it have like a fierce eagle on
yeah,
it or
of
something?
course, of course. Yeah, it was like, so like the whole concept was, well, we're just gonna, there's some loophole in the law that allows us to use platinum, so we platinum, and we're gonna make it $1 trillion, and it's gonna wipe out some of our debt, and we're not gonna have a debt ceiling problem anymore. And like, for me, the idea that, well, this is so pathetic, right? You're gonna put this bald eagle on the front of this. It has this fierce talons, and it's like, this is the $1 trillion coin. Yeah, we're so tough. And then it's just the most pathetic thing in the world, right? Like, you're trying to avert this debt ceiling showdown crisis where literally, if they hadn't figured it out, then like the entire world economy would collapse. and they're just trying to save it because they don't want everyone realizing that it's all just this big Ponzi, like fake money pump, like print the money to save everything, and they're trying to just keep confidence, keep everybody.
It's got to be something to do with
I don't. Maybe I don't know. And the irony to say like, well, we don't want people realizing that it's all fake bullshit, and we're gonna just print $1 trillion coin. Like, no, you're like, there's big neon signs now. Like, this is all fake. Like, if you could do that, then it's definitely all fake, right? And so that's like, I start the book, or maybe at some point in the book, I talk about, well, why do we need Bitcoin? And the answer is because the system is broken, right? And the $1 trillion platinum coin is a metaphor for the system being broken. But what's really true in my experience is, maybe I should just talk louder, or maybe people at home cannot see it. The system is broken, and everybody feels that way, but they don't really know how to attribute it, right? And so the purpose of my book was to say, hey, if you're on the left side of the political spectrum, if you're left of center, you're liberal or progressive, you feel like the system is broken, and you've been told these are the reasons, but let's think more critically about it. And then let's think about how Bitcoin can be a solution, or looking through a Bitcoin lens can make you better understand those problems. Because there isn't a person around who doesn't think that like everything's going to shit and it's all horrible, right? Like, there's problems everywhere, and left or right. On the left, thinking about it differently.
Okay, push the button. Okay, frequency setup. Okay,
Is that better?
go ahead.
Maybe. Okay. So far,
Group scan.
maybe that's why the tape is here.
But should I put the IR up to the
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
you very eloquently explained it there. I mean, what I think is very funny is like, this wasn't about spending more. It was really just about being able to pay off the debt. They had both sides of the political spectrum had agreed to incur in the first place, right? So
Exactly,
it was
yeah.
in the best interest of the left and the right to raise the debt ceiling, and that's just the nature of this system. They have to keep kicking the can down the road.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, like pointing to understanding Bitcoin as a systemic alternative to this is really crucial. And the way that when you learn about Bitcoin, it sort of expands your worldview, which is something we were kind of talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And I was watching a podcast with Alex Gladstein, and he said, Bitcoin teaches you to ask the right questions, and it teaches you all these things about the way the world actually works. And I feel like
Right.
this is something that probably everyone in this room can very much relate to. You learn about Bitcoin, and you start to question a lot of things. I mean, I know from personal experience, I was halfway through my bachelor's of economics when I discovered Bitcoin, and that led me to just reevaluate everything I had learned in the 2 years prior. And so I'm sure you feel that way, and I feel like this was sort of a central theme of your book, because you're sort of laying out the way that Bitcoin changed your worldview as a progressive.
Yeah.
And so, like, I guess my question is, how did it change your worldview? Why does it change your worldview?
Yeah, I think if I had to answer it in one sentence, it's like all of the problems that I saw in the world as like a liberal person, right? Like, are all caused by something one layer down than what I thought they were caused by. And so like I look around the world and say, oh, well, this is what I don't like. I would really like this to be different. I'm going to vote for these people, and this is what the media is telling me is the cause of that problem. And all of those things are just sort of one layer down, right? And so what I mentioned in the book is like the idea that there's like really greedy billionaires who like take advantage of the system for their own benefit is not like just some unfortunate symptom on top of an otherwise healthy system, right? It's not just like, oh, if we can get rid of the greedy billionaires who are taking stuff for themselves, then everything else will be fine. The greedy billionaires are embedded and inwoven into the system in a way that you can't take out. And so like just understanding that everything that we're seeing as sort of problems with what we have currently going on is woven into the financial systems at a layer deeper than I thought they were. I thought that I had all the answers, because there are really true answers out there. Like you can read all the books and watch all the newspapers and whatever you want to do, right? And people have really good explanations for why the world is how it is, and some of that stuff is true. And also, like, one layer deeper, you have the financial layer that, like, the money that we're using is broken, and the money that we're using is forced on most of the world against their will, who has no say in it. And those are, like, a lot of the problems are stemming from that. That's not something that I ever thought about before I got into Bitcoin. So thinking about the problems in that way, and then also realizing that Bitcoin provides a lens to look through the solutions, right? Like, I'm never going to say Bitcoin fixes everything, right? I say Bitcoin is step 0. You have Bitcoin, now you can work and solve some of the problems that we see in our world. But that's a step 0. It's going to be hard to really fix the problems if you have, like, a broken money system.
Yeah. In many ways, everything is kind of downstream from the money, and that's what you sort of begin to realize, or at least it's the first step to getting towards what we're trying to build. Something we were talking about earlier, we did a Spaces just before this, if anyone tuned in online, but we were talking about how kind of the differentiation in perspectives towards Bitcoin from people, let's just say, in the USA. I'm sure you've all kind of experienced this when talking to your friends or family about Bitcoin, and they probably approach it mostly like from a financial investment perspective. And this is okay. In many ways, Bitcoin is an investment, but when you learn about it more, you realize that really it's just the best money humanity's ever created, and it is the epitome of financial freedom. And what is happening is that you realize that the people living in, let's just say, Western democracies might not fully understand the value proposition of Bitcoin because they don't necessarily have a use case for it. They're living in a democracy with a functioning legal system, with a relatively stable currency and access to a bank account. All of these different things, comforts that 72% of the global population cannot afford. And so I guess, and this is part of the work that we do at HRF, is using Bitcoin as a tool for human rights and helping activists and nonprofits and really just everyday citizens who are living under tyranny use Bitcoin to push back. And so I guess my question to you, Jason, is maybe you could explain a little bit of like why Bitcoin is financial freedom. What are the properties of Bitcoin that contribute it to being financial freedom, and how is that like uplifting people outside of like the global minority?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point, right? And I do try to mention this in my book, which is like most of my audience or the people I talk to on a day-to-day are from America, and they have a bank account, and their debit card works when they go to pay for their beer and all of that, right? And I've done a lot of talks at the school that I teach at to try to like get people to widen their perspective and to realize that as an American, like you say, you know, rule of law and property rights and all of those things are not like common in the world. And so like the very idea that Bitcoin is a technology that allows you to move from place to place, it's a borderless technology. It can't be censored or stifled, or you know, you can actually send money to somebody else peer-to-peer without a government or a bank siphoning it off or freezing accounts. And so what we see is like all around the world, like you have the danger of a political activist or somebody who's trying to make the world a better place getting their bank accounts frozen, or like even a political party in some countries that like, oh, well, you don't get to have a bank account anymore because you're running against me and I'm in charge, right? And so you see all of those horrible things happening. Well, Bitcoin addresses all of those things, right? So like if you can educate people and bring people along to understand how it works, well, it's censorship resistant, and you know, there's a level of transparency involved, and you can actually go across borders frictionlessly in a way that, you know, the normal traditional financial rails don't work. You can actually, you know, all of the people in the world who want to be do-gooders and like make the world a better place, well, they can get funds without having to like go through the traditional financial systems that exist in another country. And you know, like you say, not everybody has the sort of property rights and the rule of law that we have here in America. So it's actually a real, like, it's a real concern, right? How do you actually like have a grassroots movement if you can't pay for things, right? And if you're running a political campaign and you're an opposition party to something, somebody who's been in power or is a dictator or something like that, there's no way to operate if your bank accounts are frozen. So we can see Bitcoin just in general as a solution to that. And to get Americans to understand that can be difficult, right? Where, they say, you can't explain the value proposition of Bitcoin to like an American, and you don't have to explain it to somebody, from another country. So I feel like I try to educate Americans about this all the time, and their response is usually like, "Oh yeah, that's that's right," but it's just too complicated, and they walk away. Right? So we just gotta keep chipping away at it.
It's a slow process for sure.
Yeah.
I think another part of it is the lack of intermediaries, right? So in your book, you kind of walk through the process of someone sending a Venmo transaction from one person to another, and you list it's like a paragraph of all the steps. It just starts with the person initiating the transaction. Well, maybe you want to walk them through it. I'm like, you wrote the book, so.
No.
But my point, perhaps, is
Yeah.
to point out that each point within, I guess, let's just say the traditional financial system, there are so many intermediaries involved, and each point of contact in a given transaction opens up the possibility of surveillance, of censorship. And that's true here in the US, but that's
Right.
even more true in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that Bitcoin is peer-to-peer, and I can send value to you digitally from my phone to your phone, and we can verify that it's true. We can run our nodes, and we can do that. And the problem is that Venmo seems like that. Right? Like
On the surface,
on the
yes.
surface, right? Like I can send you the $15 for the avocado toast, and it looks like it just shows up on your phone. Like, oh look, I have $15. But the reality is, there's 12 banks behind the scene, and there's many points in the process. And again, like if it's not avocado toast, but it's something else that the government doesn't like, either here or abroad, then like that, every single one of those banks and that transaction and that transfer of funds is an opportunity to be censored or to be put on a list or something like that, right? So the surveillance is real. So it used to be that like Americans didn't worry about that, and that's something we need to worry about in other countries, and that's true. And I feel like more and more people who are the target audience of my book are realizing like, wow, maybe even in America, like I'm doing things or I support things, I donate to causes that the president doesn't like. And so I feel like that, even in America now, it's starting to maybe sink in, or I hope it is, that that Venmo transaction that seems instantaneous and peer-to-peer isn't, and Bitcoin really is. So Bitcoin is sort of like the promise that the technology in our pockets that everybody's used to and is comfortable with, technology actually does, Bitcoin actually does it, and Venmo doesn't.
It's like quite deceitful in a way, and nobody's thinking about it, right? At least not outside of this room.
Because it works, right?
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
99% of the time it works, and because you're in America, you have an American bank account, and you're sending money for avocado toast, right? But as things change, or if you're in a different place in a different time, then that's not true, and the instantaneousness of that transaction comes to light. Actually, no, that's a 2-week waiting period, and that's 4 or 5 different banks involved in making that happen. That could be a real pinch point for people who are doing the quote-unquote wrong thing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best examples, I would say, of sort of wide-scale financial repression is the SIFA system in Africa. And you talk about this briefly in your book. But for those that are unfamiliar, the SIFA system is a currency system imposed upon 14 African nations by France, which effectively abstracts monetary authority to France and has all these stipulations that really just remove the monetary sovereignty that these African nations have. So I don't know if you got them on the top of your head, but maybe we can talk a little bit about some of those stipulations that they go over.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this isn't necessarily a big surprise to most Bitcoiners, but the financial system is used to oppress people, right? And I think that the idea that we live in this enlightened time where all of these European colonial powers have just vacated their colonies and let them be, is not true, right? So, this is one example, right, of France sort of imposing sort of their financial policies on these African nations, who is essentially designed to just extract their value, right? Like these are the natural resources, and what we're going to do is if you need to you need to use our money, we print it. We promise you that it's going to be a stable value, but like it can change overnight, right? So there can be this hyperinflation overnight, and you don't have any say in it. You have to hold your reserves in Paris, right?
50%.
Yeah, and you have to offer all of your like minerals and like natural resources to us first before you can offer it to anyone else.
Yeah.
So it's just this sort of neo-colonialism where it's still oppressing all of the and like it is an extractive system by design that is again under the surface, right? Like what I said before, like all of the problems that exist in society that I want to be solved, I used to think were up here, but they're underneath, and nobody's paying attention to how the money works or like what are the limitations or what are the stipulations that like France is putting on these 14 African nations. But like once you start to look at it through a Bitcoin lens, it becomes really obvious, right? Like what you can exert control over them over other people without a military presence just by these contracts.
Monetary colonialism.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean like so the whole like selling point of the system too is that the CFA currency is pegged to the euro, and that's like their whole like, oh, it's great. But it's not. And I mean, one of the most easy examples I can pull here is I believe it was either 1994 or 95. They devalued the CFA franc by 50% overnight. Obviously, that's just going to devastate the purchasing power of anyone living in these countries. And this was made without their permission or even really any notice. So yeah.
And you can imagine, like everyone in this room can do that thought experiment. If you woke up tomorrow morning and your bank account was literally cut in half, like what would that do to your standard of living and your ability to work yourself out of poverty or whatever, fill in the blank. And the fact that nobody has a say in it, right? Like France in this case is like just dictating these policies and this like this set of policies on these other countries, and then once you get for many years, once you get like a politician in one of these countries speaking out against it, then they wake up dead, and there's all these mysterious things happening.
Yeah.
And so these are the kinds of things that happen where you like. When I talk to my target audience and I say, okay, well, you're a progressive person. You want to see good things happen in the world. You don't want to see other countries like subjecting, foreign nations to these kinds of, requirements. People agree with that, but they've never looked at it through a Bitcoin lens. So the hope is that the book provides that lens for them to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess this is a good segue into the next point I wanted to make, which is these sorts of problems aren't exclusive to Africa or France. Here, right at home, we have something called the petrodollar. And this is something you talk about extensively in your book, Jason, and personally one of my favorite topics kind of within like monetary history, because it's such a pivotal event, on par with what I would say, like on par with the Nixon shock, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And just maybe just walk us through what happened, the deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia to price oil in dollars and the ramifications that have had.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not unrelated to the Nixon shock either, right? I think that you have dollars backed by gold. All of a sudden, that goes away in 1971, and then all of a sudden, you're realizing that like this oil stuff seems pretty important, right? So everyone's going to want oil, and how are they going to pay for it? And the U.S. is in this, in the middle of the Cold War with Russia, and you can imagine that if every barrel of oil coming out of Saudi Arabia was priced in rubles, like this would have sort of the mirror effect, right? So Nixon sent over a delegation and figure out how they can get oil priced in dollars. And that means every nation in the world who wants to buy oil, which is everybody, needs dollars, and it drives up the demand for dollars. And the condition is, we'll give you arms, we're going to help you protect yourself, and you're going to have like military weapons coming your way, but you need to also take those dollars that you get and invest in our debt, right? So American debt is now sort of being financed through the purchase of oil, which has to happen in dollars, which is happening from every country in the world, right? So you're creating this system that is giving, like, in a sense, artificial demand for like U.S. debt, which allows us to spend more and not tax and all that stuff, right? So you end up getting this sort of like ballooning of the U.S. debt. You end up getting like the U.S. beholden to Saudi Arabia in lots of like really, troublesome ways, right? Like we're going to overlook some of the human rights violations and some of the things that are happening over there because if we upset them, then maybe they recall all of their bonds and then we're going to be in trouble, right? So it creates this really difficult relationship with a country that doesn't always align with like American values, and it's all to keep the dollar as a monetary unit and as like a system of finance afloat because it's no longer pegged to the dollar and people need to have some faith in it. So now it's kind of backed by oil in this way, and then the US debt is being sort of supplemented in that way. So it creates this whole system, right? And then you can put political pressure on nations to go along with Saudi Arabia to price their oil in dollars, and it's just a whole thing, right? It's a mess, and it's like you start to ask the question, like when I got into Bitcoin, my dad, who I love very much, asked me, well, what's Bitcoin backed by? I know gold, like I know dollars are backed by gold, so what's Bitcoin backed by? And I was like, well, actually, Dad, no, like that's not true, right? So you really end up with this whole question, like what is backing the dollar? Is it the oil? Is it the debt? Is it the military? Is it the taxes? Is it the U.S. economy? It's like it's just like a platinum coin, right? Yeah.
I guess it's just a little bit of everything. Yeah, I mean, the petrodollar system. I mean, it just came at such an important inflection point and literally bolstered the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency at a point where it very realistically could have ceased to being reserve currency.
Correct. Yeah.
And allowed that massive expansion of debt. I mean, Saudi Arabia was effectively funding U.S. deficits so the U.S. could spend insane amounts of money and raise the standard of living for those living in the United States. But the question is at what cost, right?
Right.
And the cost was effectively propping up an authoritarian government.
And
who was committing when they got involved with the Yemen civil war and all
right.
these things, there's many levels to this. But arms shipment to Saudi Arabia increased 16-fold the year after that deal compared to the 3 years prior. So there is data and evidence backing this up. And a lot of this didn't come out until recently.
No,
Yeah.
and you can see the documentation of it. It was held secret for a while, but it's out now, so you can kind of read through it. And it's pretty alarming, but it's not like a black and white thing, right? Like if it didn't happen, like it's hard to imagine the U.S. necessarily winning the Cold War in the way that we did, or on the timeline that we did too. So it's not like just only bad, but it's kind of complicated, right? And so there's no good answer there, but it's definitely like an indication that the money system, it's not working as people think. If my dad thinks that dollars are backed by gold, who else thinks that, right?
My dad thought Canada's dollar was backed by gold. Canada has zero gold.
And so like what it does is it sheds a light on like how does a system actually work, because we all use money every day, but we never think about it. We never think about what makes good money or where the money comes from or what it's backed by. And so Bitcoin, if nothing else, even if you I tell people this, if you read my book, and these are like normies who have never thought about Bitcoin, even if you don't go all in on Bitcoin after you're done reading my book, you will definitely start thinking about the current system differently and realizing some of the problems that are inherent and interwoven into the system. And that's probably like a win, right? If we can get people thinking about the system differently, maybe the purchasing of Bitcoin comes later or something, but I think that the idea that the petrodollar is a thing and it's really damaging, and it puts the U.S. as like a geopolitical force in a compromising position, that's a thing. But getting people to realize that that happened is also a thing, right? Like, oh wow, there's a lot going on here that I didn't realize.
Yeah, and it doesn't help when it's kept secret. Which actually reminds me of, I think it was in 2017 we found out the details about World War I and Britain and the war bonds that they sold, which they didn't actually sell. They just told the public that they did, and they printed a ton of money, which Keynes called masterly manipulation, I believe. But that didn't come out until literally like 8 years ago.
And it's all a confidence game, right? Like you can't publish the fact that your war bonds didn't sell because then the confidence in the dollars that or the pounds that you're printing goes down, right? So it's all a confidence game in like the literal sense of the word, and
because it's a Ponzi scheme.
Because it's a Ponzi, and like it's a house of cards that can collapse, right? And this is where the platinum coin comes in, because we can't let people lose confidence. It's just such a ridiculous example. We can't let the debt get out of control, or we can't let the debt ceiling hit, so we need to print this platinum coin. Doesn't solve the problem, it just shines a light on it, right? So that was the point that I tried to make in the book. But like the same thing with these World War I, war bonds not selling and that being kept secret. It's not a surprise that it's kept secret, right? Same thing with these petrodollar deals and like making like explicit deals with Saudi Arabia, kept secret, right? And it's because the U.S. dollar needs faith in it to work, and it works. But if people lost faith in it tomorrow, then that would not be a good situation.
Yeah, so I mean, in that way, you'd almost say like the dollar is backed by people's confidence and faith in it, like more than anything else, perhaps, because it's so abstract.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the hilarious thing is. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, and it's a government that nobody has faith in or gives credit to, like whatever we're dealing with, right? So yeah, it is like you need faith in it, faith in the system.
Yeah, which I no longer have. So go Bitcoin.
Yeah, and like trust, don't or verify. Don't trust.
Don't
verify.
trust, verify. Yeah. I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about the role the IMF and the World Bank have played in sort of like propping up this system, and the role they play with developing countries and things like that. I mean, for people that are unfamiliar, the International Monetary Fund provides short-term loans to countries that are in like an economic crisis of some sort, and they usually make them go into some sort of austerity measures. They're usually very undemocratic conditions that are not agreed upon by the people, but usually negotiated between the IMF and oftentimes an autocratic leader who implements the austerity measures at the cost of being allowed to stay in power and things like that.
Right.
And then the World Bank focuses more on like long-term development, but the problem is it's turned into sort of like this resource extraction machine that funnels resources to the West and has funded sort of this lifestyle we've all been able to live at the cost of who else, right? So
yeah, like we're all living a much better lifestyle because of it, right? In the U.S.
Yeah,
and
so it's like
nations,
a double-edged sword. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
we enjoy this higher lifestyle, but at what cost? And is it really worth it, or is it fair? Which obviously it's not. So I mean, maybe you can shed some more light on that.
I think that the best way to think about it is the International Monetary Fund was created after World War II because dollars were pegged to gold and everything else was pegged to dollars, and this was the Bretton Woods system, and we needed like a fund to keep all of those exchange rates proper, and like this is the International Monetary Fund. And we don't have any of that shit anymore, and the IMF still exists, right?
Their purposes have like fundamentally shifted from that, right? Like
So
when the Bretton Woods system ended, they just had to go and find some other role to play in the global financial system.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's been what I can see as a net negative, right? Yeah.
Exactly, and it's a net negative in the world,
Like,
and forcing nations into like this sort of perpetual debt where, we give you debt that we know you can't pay back, and you're just going to pay that by taking more debt. And then the austerity measures, of course, are not intended at all to help them get out of debt. It's actually, reducing education, reducing healthcare. There's some pretty horrific stuff that happened in the 60s that probably doesn't happen anymore, but the whole thing is designed to just keep nations perpetually in debt and beholden to essentially like a global superpower that runs both the IMF and the World Bank, whether explicitly or not, to sort of extract, right? So they say, well, we're going to give you this loan, but now you have to only, instead of growing rice, you're going to grow shrimp, and that's going to ruin all the rice fields. And, you've seen Alex Gladstein talk about this, but like essentially in a way that like makes it shrimp cheaper for me as an American to buy, but like doesn't help people feed themselves in these other countries, right? And so this is what's happening all over the world, and the number of countries that have had multiple different loans, and then the stipulations and the austerity measures placed on those nations. It's it's not the same, but it's the similar idea is what France is doing with these CFA countries, where you're just like, I can't get out from under your thumb if you're going to put these limitations on me, and it's not designed for them to get out from under the thumb, right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is all, like, you can go on the IMF website and look at all this. This is all, you can see the agreement for every country and how many agreements they have and how much was dispersed. And the common theme for pretty much 95% at least is that the country is now more indebted than when they originally struck a loan with the IMF. So clearly the stated goal of the IMF is not really being achieved. They're not really helping these developing countries, for lack of a better word, become developed, right?
No, because
it's a debt trap.
It's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not in our interest to have them become developed, right? Like if we can take their minerals and their shrimp, then that's going to make our lives better. And so, you saw a lot of things happening in the news about the IMF and El Salvador, and somebody asked me out front before this, and I was like, well, I didn't read the news today, so I don't know what the hell's going on. But it's like it's the unfortunate truth that if you need money from the IMF, they get to tell you what to do, right? And so I think that's what's happening with El Salvador, and they don't like Bitcoin, and so the signal there is the IMF is afraid of Bitcoin. They're going to play it off as something else, right? Like, oh, Bitcoin is risky and we don't want you dabbling in risky stuff when we're giving you money. But like the truth is, like, Bitcoin provides an opportunity for nations to use their own natural resources and their own wealth that they have in their country to mine Bitcoin, to buy Bitcoin, and possibly get out from underneath the thumb of the IMF. But all of that's yet to be seen, right? So.
Yeah, well, I mean, the IMF is trying to restrict the very means that could allow a country to circumvent the IMF in the first place, right? Like,
right. This is what you do when you. And what do we call it when somebody gives you a loan and then puts such stipulations on it that you can't get out of the loan, right? Like, that's a problem.
Yeah, totally. And exemplifying that, like in El Salvador, I believe the agreement had the word Bitcoin was mentioned over 220 times in the agreement. So it's like it's clearly a very central focus. They clearly feel threatened by it, and so they're trying to stop El Salvador from buying or mining Bitcoin, and they've removed these legal tender laws, and there's just not enough transparency on either side to really tell what is going on right now. Like, I have so many questions, like how many wallets does Bukele have? Where are the Bitcoins he's transferring coming from? Like, there's so many questions unanswered, and it's really hard to tell like what is going on with the situation, because you're coming from a place where like this country was all like, screw the IMF, and now they're taking a 1.4 billion loan.
It makes you think, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not necessarily a Bukele fan. Like, I thought it was kind of cool that there was a country who was like adopting Bitcoin, but now like we kind of, but now that we know how it ended, like, go back and think about what the hell's going on. I don't know. Like, I feel like you said, there's not enough transparency on either side. And I think that's kind of a problem, right? Like, one of the benefits of Bitcoin and what I talk about in the book is like, the fact on governance is the transparency. Like, you don't have to hide any money. Like, you can actually like see it on chain and all of that, right? So there's no reason to be secretive, and like hopefully Bitcoin pushes governments towards, in my thinking, like towards more transparency and more accountability. Like, I think that's the beauty of it. I know a lot of Bitcoiners just want governments to exist anymore, but like short of that, like maybe they can be more transparent and more accountable to their citizenry. And then you have somebody like Bukele who's not necessarily doing that, so not a good feeling. But
yeah, I mean, I think we can all get behind smaller government at the very least. Maybe how do you maybe walk us through how you see Bitcoin sort of helping people be more represented politically, but also like the accountability you're talking about. Like, why does Bitcoin make a government more accountable and to the people specifically that they are governing, instead of kind of having what seems to be right now a very big disconnect? Like, I don't feel represented by my elected officials. So
yeah, I think on the base level, right? Like, politicians can promise you anything that they want, and then they can just sort of print the money to make it happen, right? So they can promise you, we're going to give you all these things, and we're not going to tax you for them, and then everyone's happy, and then everyone gets reelected, right? And the truth is that politicians really can't give you everything you want and not tax you for it unless they're printing the money. So if
There is no free lunch.
right, and so I think that people forget that sometimes, and so the hope is, or the vision is, well, if your government is based on a Bitcoin standard, or you're using currency that's pegged to Bitcoin, or you're using Bitcoin itself, then there is no printing of Bitcoin. And if you want to offer something to your citizenry, then you have to pay for it. And so you need to go to your people and say, this is a priority that I think should happen. This is what I want to do with my government and what I think should happen for our people. And this is how much it's going to cost. And we don't do that, right? Like everyone complains about paying taxes, but like nobody here is paying as many taxes, what they should be paying.
I would rather pay taxes and then print money.
Right, exactly. And so the idea is, well, if you don't, yeah, hot take. If you don't like what they're doing, or you don't like how much they're spending, or you don't like how much you're being taxed, then you can vote them out. But none of those, like, there are no guardrails anymore, right? Like, everybody's just sort of getting everything they want and not being taxed all the way for it, and then still complaining about being taxed, and the government's too big. But there's no accountability either, because every congressional district gets their little project and everything like that. So the thought is, well, if you have your government's finances on the blockchain, or your money is tied to Bitcoin, then I'm not one of those people that say the government shouldn't exist. The government does important things that I think should still happen, but I also think that they should be paid for. And if you're going to be accountable and transparent to me, then I can vote you out, or we can come up with a different system. But that's not anywhere close to what we have right now. So that's the vision.
Yeah, a better world for sure. Geez, how long have we been up here? I'm not even sure now. Almost.
I don't know.
Did we start at 6:30?
Yeah, about 6:35.
6:35. How long do we go till questions?
As long as you want. We can ask questions right now. If
I was gonna
anyone's
say,
got
I'm
them.
like,
The holding the microphone between the tape.
Well, maybe-
helps. Thank you. Yeah.
I do want to apologize for any audio issues earlier.
It's
We have
obviously
brand new
it's my
equipment,
fault.
as you can see.
If you hold it down here, it doesn't work. Okay.
I'm gonna test the theory.
We're working out the kinks, but it's going to be
That
great.
actually
next
like
time.
I know,
immediately
right?
happened.
How did you know? All right.
There you go. Thank
Okay,
you.
cool.
But if we do have any questions, just raise your hand. I'll come around with this mic, and we can get to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bitcoin's price is quite volatile. So I'm curious, how do you deal with that when like making payments in Bitcoin, or like, for example, storing your money in Bitcoin?
Yeah. So Bitcoin price is volatile, right? So like the idea is like a lot of the conversation we had tonight is like not thinking about it as an investment, right? Which is like a step one for talking to the people that I love and care about, right? Just sort of zoom out, like how can it make the world a better place on the base layer. But really, it's like accepting Bitcoin as payment is all about like realizing that, okay, I'm okay with the volatility because when I zoom out, it's volatile up. Or you can do like a spend and replace where you're like, I pay my barber in Bitcoin. Oh my God, what's that Bitcoin going to be worth in 10 years? But I'm okay with that because I'm going to just replace it with my Bitcoin for now. So I think that, I don't own a company that accepts Bitcoin, but I wish that I did because that would be kind of cool in 10 years. So I feel like the volatility is an issue, right? So we have like things like if we're trying to do good around the world, like stable coins help in the intermediate term, but the volatility is something you just have to be okay with, and the advice is zoom out. If you're thinking about Bitcoin as an investment, like a Western person in a liberal democracy, and I just want to make more dollars, then yeah, the volatility can be a problem. But if you're thinking about investing in like the base layer of better money, then it's less of a problem. Yeah.
We have a live breaking. Sorry to interrupt.
no.
If I can play Dennis Porter for a second. So President Trump has signed an executive order to establish the strategic Bitcoin reserve. 200,000 Bitcoin that are already held by the U.S. Marshals are undergoing a full audit and accounting of the federal government's digital asset holdings. The U.S. will not sell any of this Bitcoin deposited into the reserve. It will be kept as a store of value. The reserve is like a digital Fort Knox for the cryptocurrency, often called digital gold. I'm reading from David Sachs, the current crypto czar. I apologize for interrupting, but this is a big deal, and he highlights promises made, promises kept. This is a pretty long post by David Sachs, but ahead of what's happening tomorrow in DC with the Crypto Council or the Summit or whatever we're calling it these days, this is a pretty big deal. It's complicated, right? These are not necessarily their coins. A lot of that have to do with hacks and seizures of folks that were having Bitcoin at like Bitfinex and elsewhere. But this is apparently moving forward. So anyway, live breaking from Dennis
Cool.
Porter.
Thank you.
Thomas now. All right, continue.
Wait, so no crypto or just Bitcoin?
No,
Is
no
that what
crypto
I'm-
mentioned here.
Okay.
Thank God. No, I don't see Ripple in here anywhere.
Yeah, that's a
we
good
are
thing.
considering doing a little bit of a Ripple thing here. If you pay in Ripple, pay triple. I think that would work. But
I think that's
I don't know. We got to find a broker for that.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was not expecting live breaking news, but I did want to add to the volatility question. I would say that volatility is a natural aspect of price discovery. I mean, for an asset undergoing monetization, there is nothing else that's ever existed in this world like Bitcoin. It is truly like anything else. Satoshi said something along the lines of, "There's literally nothing to compare it to." And so what we've seen throughout its 15-year and 16-year history is that it has, had these euphoric rises followed by these huge crashes, but every single time it has another euphoric rise and establishes itself at a level higher than it was before. So it's more accurately characterized as upward volatility is what I like to call it. But there are also technologies, open source tech being built. One of them is called stable channels, and it allows you to peg the Bitcoin value you have in a Lightning channel to US dollars. And so you can transact on Lightning while completely eliminating the volatility of the Bitcoin you're holding. So there are, open source tech is advancing every single day, and the things that I'm seeing being built on Bitcoin give me a lot of hope for addressing most of these common kind of,
Yeah, and that's the best thing about being in the Bitcoin space, right? Is that you have like the smartest people in the world working on stuff to make it better. And it's a valid point, right? Like if you have somebody who's struggling to get by, and like Bitcoin is their chance to get ahead, like a wild price swing can just totally ruin them, right? So we do need to be conscious of these things. Do you have any reaction to the breaking news?
I've tried to keep my opinions not have an opinion. That's what I've tried to do because it's just been so uncertain. All this news, we're having a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and then it's a crypto reserve, and there's all these different people, and I can't really tell what's the truth, what's going on, what's really going to happen. I was kind of just waiting for it to right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, feel free to share your thoughts. I feel like you've got something.
Well,
yeah. Take it away, Jason.
Get booed out of this place probably. I think like holding on to the Bitcoin that you have is different than buying new Bitcoin, right? Is that true? It's like
Yes, I would say that's different. Yeah.
Well, that's what you. Okay. I like how it's not crypto and it's only Bitcoin,
Yeah.
but I
That's a
think
win.
Thomas is right. Like, like who do these coins belong to really? So I don't know. It's complicated. I think that I would much rather, like if you told me you have a choice, you can have a strategic Bitcoin reserve that the government's going to hold on at 200,000 Bitcoin, or they're going to pass laws that make it easier for regular people to hold Bitcoin, buy it, and use it like as currency. Like we're going to get rid of the tax laws that make it impossible to or hard to use Bitcoin as a currency. I'd rather just have the government make it easier to use and save in Bitcoin than buy it themselves. That's what I would rather.
100%.
And
you are.
I feel like if we had a president who was really a Bitcoin president, like that's what we would have, right? But the push to get a strategic Bitcoin reserve and this idea that like, well, there's all this game theory. Well, that's fun. I like when the number goes up. But if you're just doing it for the number to go up, then you're not really maybe like really attuned to the ethos behind what Bitcoin can do to make the world better. You're also gonna, well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. A sovereign populace is infinitesimally more important and powerful than a sovereign state. And in this situation, I mean, like grassroots adoption and regulations like removing capital gains tax are so much more impactful than just the states establishing a Bitcoin reserve, which I do think is a good thing. But make no mistake, Bitcoin doesn't need America. America needs Bitcoin. That's why they're doing this.
Yeah.
It's really like, in some ways, could be seen as like an attempt to extend U.S. hegemony, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. And
like over the long term.
And honestly, like, there's probably about 100 countries that I think need it more than the U.S. needs it, right? Yeah. So, but it's fine. Like, it is what it is. We can't talk about what should be, but it's an interesting development, and I'm glad we learned about it together today, all in this room.
Wait, we were doing questions, weren't we?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, very interesting development, especially coming off of Friday's discussion with Senator Lummis, and she stated that it is known that they do not actually have the votes for or support for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So this sort of kind of, if you will, skirts around the U.S. actually having to put up funds in order to secure that Bitcoin, while still, I guess, making everybody happy in terms of Cardano, Sol, Ripple. Oh, well, let's just appease the Bitcoin people here really quickly first. That to me is very rich, and I do agree with you. We do need more adoption, and that has to be based on U.S. actually removing some of the CapEx pieces, as well as focusing on privacy, which we also heard come out of the meeting, and there's an attack vector that is there. So how do we get this information about privacy, usage of Bitcoin in order to drive adoption?
Yeah, I'll just say the point you make is a valid one, right? Because having things happen by executive order is it sounds awesome when it's the thing you like, right? But it is very short-term thinking, because anything that's done by executive order can be undone by executive order. It's not actually getting grassroots support from the ground up. We're just doing top-down stuff, right? Like, short-term thinking, top-down stuff is not what I associate with the Bitcoin community. And so for people to be supportive of top-down stuff that is short-term thinking doesn't really jive with me. Like, I can't make it make sense. So I feel like we need to be petitioning our Congress people and getting adoption up in their districts, so that the Congress people feel beholden to their constituency who appreciates Bitcoin, and then they go and support a Bitcoin strategic reserve by law, that it can't be just undone with the one sign of a pen as an executive order. And the hard truth is that doesn't happen in 2025. Like, that happens in 2032, 2036, right? That takes time. And like, Bitcoiners as a group, like as a community, are people who I think have low time preference and who like to think in long term. And all of this stuff, which is just sort of like, well, let's get the strategic Bitcoin reserve now. Let's make the price pump up now. Let's get some exit liquidity and all of these other altcoins right now. Like, this is all very short-term thinking, and I feel like it's unfortunate, to be honest with you. So I feel like there's no real answer. There's no magic wand, right? Like, it's great to have Cynthia Lummis support Bitcoin, but we need 30, 40 more senators. We need 200 more Congress people, and that's not going to happen until their constituents do it. So we just need to talk to the people that we know, like, who is in your sphere of influence, right? And for me, I decided to write a book, but we all have people we can talk to help adoption, and I feel like it's just it should be a long-term process. And the fact that we're trying to sort of circumvent it, and it's fun because Bitcoin goes to 100K and the president is talking about it, that's all. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it's definitely not the ethos that I thought of when I thought of the Bitcoin community.
I think it's fair to say I was not expecting Bitcoin to become such a strong topic in the 2024 election. I think that it was something I thought would be later on in the future, for sure. So
right, and for me, people are just, yell out sour grapes, right? Oh, well, you're a progressive, and it's Trump who's doing it. But I literally don't think that it was a good idea to for the Bitcoin community, and that's a very small minority of well-funded people in the Bitcoin community, to force the issue in the 2024 election. And I'm not saying it's all bad, but there's definitely, we should be thoughtful about that. Was Bitcoin ready for the main stage?
Do the people implementing these policies actually understand Bitcoin, right? That's kind of the fundamental thing for me. It seems like maybe that is not the case, to be honest with you. And I'm just saying that based on the fact that, there's really hasn't been that much differentiation between Bitcoin and crypto, which, I mean, to anyone in the Bitcoin space, you know, we say Bitcoin, not crypto, right? So, yeah, I mean, like there definitely could have been. I feel like there could be more awareness like about that, and I mean, this really just comes back to like the importance of grassroots, impartial Bitcoin education, and you know, peer-to-peer education, and talking to the people that you know and that are influential and things like that. So. Yeah, it's still a grassroots movement, people. Like this is not, you know, Bitcoin is happening all over the world, and ultimately, it's not even about the States. It's a global phenomenon for good.
Absolutely.
One thing that he also mentioned, which I kind of wanted to ask you about too, is like the importance of privacy around Bitcoin. So I just wanted to kind of get what's your kind of thoughts or commentary on like how most of it has gone to KYC now as opposed to where we started.
Yeah, I think that it's really, really, really hard to be completely private and use Bitcoin right now. So I mean, I feel like that's unfortunate, but I do think that like we were talking earlier, right? Like the technology and like the people developing new ways to do things all the time, right? And so. I'm optimistic about the future, right? Like about the idea that you know, there used to be a way to do like a coin join, right? I'm optimistic about the future. I'm a little bit, you know, I would obviously never say to anybody like use Bitcoin. It's private right now. And so I feel like that's a concern. I don't have the technical expertise to design something that helps with that, but I know other people are, right? And I feel like that's why I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, I will add. Privacy is absolutely critical. I mean, in many ways, you won't have freedom if you don't have the privacy. Like it's almost like a precursor. Yeah, totally. And this is sort of the nature of being a public blockchain, right? And like the way Bitcoin works. But I will also say the developments in privacy tech over the last year have been explosive. I don't know if you guys are familiar with silent payments. I don't know if you're familiar with Bolt 12 on the Lightning Network. I'm also like. There's also pay joins, coin pools. There are so many different privacy tools and techniques emerging, and they're almost all open source. And there's also so many wallets that are not KYC. The only ones that are KYC are kind of the worst ones in a lot of ways. I would say the best wallets are all not KYC right off the bat. There are a ton. If you guys want to learn more about like privacy and freedom tech, subscribe to HRF's Financial Freedom Report. It's financialfreedomreport.org. Every week we cover new developments in Bitcoin, privacy, open source tech, Nostr, all of that stuff. So like we're like right on the forefront of reporting on the advancements in privacy. So you probably really enjoy that. But we also talk about like how authoritarian regimes are using financial repression as a tool to suppress their population and political opposition and nonprofits and stuff. But yeah, so privacy is a huge piece of the puzzle. But I have hope based on the things that I'm seeing and the developments that are coming out of like the open source space. So yeah.
So considering the World Bank, IMF history of resource exploitation and also violence, past and current, and you know, this emerging appearance that they're threatened by Bitcoin, do you guys see potential for violence, like increased violence in the future as Bitcoin becomes more prominent and these institutions feeling threatened? What are your thoughts on violence prevention if you see that happening?
Yeah. So, yes. Here's my take on violence prevention. Like literally is what I said before. Go slow. Like you don't need to like have the whole world adopting Bitcoin right now. We need to get more people, grassroots involved. I feel like it's, I don't say dangerous, but like you end up with these conflicts with like the institutions that exist now who see Bitcoin as a threat, and there is no guarantee that there's not going to be violence. But if you kind of infiltrate yourself and go slowly, then all of a sudden become indispensable and you're kind of in the background of everything and you can't get rid of it. Like that seems to be like maybe the better way to go. But ultimately you can't stop Bitcoin, right? But your point is well taken, and I feel like this is exactly what I've been hoping for since I've been in the space and wrote the book and given a lot of talks about this is getting people on board. The more people you get on board, and the more instrumental Bitcoin is to their lives and to understanding how it works on a grassroots level, that kind of is the buffer against the top-down authoritarian violence about like, well, we don't like that you're using it, right? And I think that, I don't think the IMF has like guns, but like they do have power, and they are backed by powerful countries. So I do think that it's a concern, and I just go back, like we don't need to be going out of our way to like get a top-down adoption from all sorts of different places. We need to be talking to people, citizens, and getting them using Bitcoin. And I feel that more we do that, the better we're going to be.
I had two separate questions. The first one is, why would Americans or even Westerners give up the privilege of having a strong dollar to that certain extent? Like, we are able to have really cheap goods, even though like we can just need to face the inflation. We're still having a better currency than the world around us. And then the second question is, how receptive has the community, or at least the progressive community, been to Bitcoin after your book?
Both great questions. I don't think that like anybody who's in a position of power really wants to give up like dollar hegemony, right? Like, they understand the benefit that the United States gets by being able to control the world economy in the way that it does, right? The reality, though, is that it's like the U.S. is kind of losing its grip slowly. And you end up with these other countries that bind together, and they're going to threaten to create some other kind of currency block, and this ultimate dollar hegemony that exists unchallenged is slipping away. And so maybe you understand that that's happening and that you need to prepare for the next thing. But certainly nobody's giving up like the most powerful thing in the world, like, voluntarily, right? And so that's why, like, the beauty of Bitcoin, right, is like we have to do this thing without them even realizing it, and then all of a sudden that can't be undone, right? We've passed that tipping point. To your second question, like, how has the reception been? Like, I get a lot of very friendly, like, progressive, liberal people who have heard about my book and not into Bitcoin, and they're willing to come and listen to me. And I feel like almost all of them are American, because that's sort of where I am. I feel like it is a very good reminder for me to realize that the Bitcoin space, as we understand it, and we pay attention to all the news, and we see what's happening, and live breaking, strategic Bitcoin reserve, and this senator does this, and all, people aren't paying attention. Like, that's the truth, right? And so, like, they know that I'm the Bitcoin person in their life. Most of the people that I know, like, I'm the only person that they know that's into Bitcoin, and still they're not plugged in yet. And so I feel like we're a long way away. And that's maybe the sad truth, is that most people that I'm dealing with, like I'm talking about colleagues, family, they're polite about it. They're interested. Like, I gave a talk about monetary colonialism at my school, and like a lot of people showed up, and they were very interested in like how the current system is broken, but I couldn't really get them as a group on board with like what's the solution. So a lot less excited than I was hoping, which is fine, right? It just means we have more work to do, and we just have to keep going. But yeah, it's interesting when you're in the Bitcoin space to zoom out and have something like a light shown on it. Be like, if you asked, 9 out of 10 Bitcoiners the day after the election, oh, we elected the Bitcoin, it's because Bitcoin, Trump got elected. Like, this is all the talk, right? Nobody I know at all was paying attention to Bitcoin at all, like in the real world, like outside of it. And they couldn't even list it as a thing that was part of the campaign. It was certainly important to all of us and like people who are into Bitcoin, and I was paying attention to it a lot. But almost nobody was like, oh yeah, this was like a Bitcoin election. Nobody talks like that. So we got a long way to go.
Then what would you think?
Quick addition about the reserve currency thing. It's very much a double-edged sword. I don't know if you're familiar with the Triffin dilemma at all, and the impact of having like an artificially strong currency because the rest of the world is using your currency, and the impact this have. I don't want to dive all the way into it, but
it's in the book.
It's in the book, and it's super interesting. So dig into that a little bit, Triffin dilemma, the gist of it is that when you have an artificially strong currency, your exports are not competitive, and you end up importing everything you need. And so that completely hollows out your industrial base and manufacturing base, and kind of leaves you reliant on imports from other countries. So in a way, it almost makes you less sovereign. So it's very much like a double-edged sword when you're like importing from a bunch of foreign powers and things like that. But definitely check that out because it's a pretty interesting economic
And I
topic.
know you have another question, but I'll just point out, this is exactly an example of what I talked about before, right? Like we think that the problems, that we all agree, okay, we have this Rust Belt, unemployment, factories are closing. Everybody has a story about why that is, and almost nobody is talking about the money.
It's
Right?
entirely the money.
It's entirely the money, right? It's not like politicians had this policy and that for this Ohio factory closed on this date. Like it's just one layer deeper, and I think that's a perfect example of a problem that we all agree is a problem, and then what's the cause of that? It's actually the money, and it's not what you think it is.
Yeah, and this was well understood, like a long time ago. Like I think his name was Robert Triffin, who predicted this happening, and it's played out exactly as he said it would in the Triffin dilemma. So yeah. Anyway, question 2.
Just the follow-up was, because we have a long way to go to kind of like get progressives involved, have you thought of ways of including them that would be, or getting them more hands-on with Bitcoin rather than just reading the book or a presentation?
Yeah, so here's a couple, right? And again, like I probably have just a drop of what we need. But one is I talk about Bitcoin in my class when it's appropriate, right? So I teach math, and I actually had a colleague of mine, which was a surprise, 2 days ago, come up, and a computer science teacher. It's like, I need a lesson plan for my computer science class so they can understand how proof of work works. Like, how does Bitcoin mining actually work? And it was the most fun that I had. Like, I stayed up all night, like, writing a lesson plan. Like, yeah, we're going to do this, right? We're going to have 15 kids, all with laptops. They're going to race each other to find the nonce that works for this. It was all perfect. And, they're going to get a piece of candy at the end. That's the block reward. But before they do that, they're going to send it to the rest of the class. They have to verify that it actually works, right? So it's like all of these factors worked in just into a 45-minute class. Like, it's happening, like kids are interested, and like then they get to learn about it. The other thing that is important, I think, is that Bitcoin needs to start showing up in places that are normal, like in conversations that aren't with like weirdos, right? And so like Bitcoin just needs to be more normalized. And so like I haven't told anybody about this, but I have this other pet project, and the pet project that I'm working on now, it's not writing a book, it's not about Bitcoin. It's kind of it's like a math thing. But there's some Bitcoin Easter eggs that are just like, not like, look at this, it's Bitcoin, like, and the government. It's just like Bitcoin is it's just a normal thing, right? So like we just need to start talking about Bitcoin as a normal thing, not as a punchline to a joke, not as, oh, you're into Bitcoin, so you're like that kind of person. Not like, oh, you're into Bitcoin, so what was it before? Oh, I kept getting ads in my YouTube when I first started getting
how
Bitcoin.
to build a bunker at home.
Yeah, how to build a bunker at home, and I'm not telling you about my bunker. So just more conversations that are normal, not like, hey, like I'm just meeting you for the first time, and the Fed. Like that's not how you get. Like you're not meeting people where they are, right? And so just more normal conversations. Like the thing I'm working on as a project is like a math thing, and it features throughout history different applications of math that are useful for human beings, and Bitcoin is just one of them, right? And that's it. So I feel like just more conversations. Like it's not like this is a Bitcoin thing. This is like a cartoon only about Bitcoin. It's not like that. It's just like Bitcoin is just like the printing press, or it's like large language models, or it's like weather prediction. It's just a tool that mathematicians use to make the world a better place. It's just like that, right? So I think that's two things that I would think off the top of my head. But again, we need a lot more than that.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I just got to say this. Going back 100 years, before there was the Rust Belt, there was the Dust Bowl. And you guys have blown my mind by pointing out that the British Empire flooded the world with funny money to pay for the war that destroyed civilization. And it destroyed American agriculture, and it destroyed the American land. If you see that old film, the plow that broke the plains, this was a result of the United States having to produce the food that Europe was no longer producing, based on this currency manipulation you described. So, gives me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Why the term progressive? I've listened to everything you said, but I'm not really sure why it's a progressive point of view. I would think it a conservative point of view or a middle-of-the-road point of view. It's just a Bitcoin point of view.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? And I feel like a lot of people who've read the book have had that same reaction, and that's kind of by design. The word progressive in the title is very intentional. It's meant to get people thinking, right? Like, oh, when I'm on Twitter or YouTube, this is not what I'm saying. Like, these two words shouldn't be together, right? So it's a thought-provoking title. I think that's the intention. But the entire book that is written based on the experience I had talking to the people that I know, I care about, and I'm connected with, and it's what arguments work with them, and they consider themselves progressive people, right? So like I'm around teachers and family members and neighbors and coworkers and all of that stuff, right? And so I self-identify as progressive, and so what I'm trying to do is give them permission to be interested in Bitcoin by using the language that they're comfortable with. So, and in the book, it's very in subtle ways where like people who might be conservative or middle of the road might not be offended by what I'm writing, but certain wordings might actually ring true for my target audience in a way that they haven't heard before about Bitcoin. So certainly, like everything that we've talked about tonight is very much like, it seems reasonable if you're into Bitcoin and all of that stuff. But it's really attempted to be presented in a way that speaks to people where they are and who have maybe not getting the messages from the other Bitcoin sources that they might be. So I actually appreciate you saying that, because I don't think that there's anything about Bitcoin that is progressive. I think that it's a lens that you can look through the world in, and it's a mirror to see what your priorities are, but it's just some code. And how you use it's a tool, and how you use it is important. And to get people to understand that, you could use Bitcoin to do good in the world is going to resonate with some people differently than some of the other messaging that's out there.
Any more questions? Maybe. Going once? Twice? Okay, that's enough. Jason, do you want to maybe give us some closing remarks?
In teacher school, that's called wait time, and but
take it away.
It's really awkward. Like you wait, you say, "Are there questions?" Then you wait an awkwardly long time.
Well, I'm not a teacher, so
no, that's fine. So I just want to appreciate. I want to thank you for inviting me. I want to thank PubKey for hosting. Like, this is an amazing place, and I never
round of applause for PubKey.
PubKey. I'm never sad to find myself here, and I have the utmost respect for the Human Rights Foundation, what you guys do, the messages that you get out, and the actual work that you do on the ground, and the education that you do. So I want to thank you for that, and for the invitation to come and just talk about how my thinking and my work intersects with what you do has been phenomenal. So just a lot of gratitude. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all you guys coming out to listen to me talk.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, PubKey.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure to come back Monday and Thursday next week. We have a pretty full week. Lots of stuff happening this month. Check our calendar, look on our meetup, and follow us on all of your favorite social media. And remember to tip your bartenders. Thank you.